It was one of those evenings when the world outside seemed to exhale and everything quieted down. The kind of evening where you could feel the weight of the day's demands lifting just a little. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room as I sat down on the couch, the familiar hum of city life just beyond the windows. I had just come back from work, a long, exhausting day that left me physically drained but still mentally buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. I ran my fingers across the edge of my phone, not really looking at it, just sort of zoning out. The usual thoughts played on a loop in my head: work, bills, plans for the weekend, nothing too exciting. But as I absent-mindedly swiped through a social media feed, an ad caught my eye. Unlock your true heritage. Discover your DNA results. I'd seen an ad for DNA tests before, of course, but this one struck me differently. Maybe it was the tagline that resonated with something deep inside me, or maybe it was just the timing. I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but the idea of digging into my past suddenly felt urgent. My curiosity had been slowly building over the years, like a slow drip of water that had finally formed a stream. I had always wondered about my family's history. Growing up, I had been surrounded by stories, mostly from my dad, about our Italian roots. According to him, my great-grandfather had come from Italy in the early 1900s, a hardworking man who built a life from scratch. Those stories were always wrapped in pride, but also shrouded in a bit of mystery. My father never talked much about the specifics of our ancestors. It was as though he was intentionally keeping certain parts of our lineage out of sight. The gaps in his stories had always left me wondering, what were we missing? And then there was my mother's side of the family. I knew so little about her background. Whenever I asked, she would say, "We're just Eastern European, that's all." But Eastern European could mean so many things. Did it mean Russia? Poland? Hungary? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I really knew about my roots. This sense of not knowing, this unspoken family mystery, had lingered with me for years. I wasn't sure if it was a feeling of longing or frustration, but there was something about the lack of clarity in my family's stories that made me uneasy. I wanted to know more, to understand who I really was and where I came from. So when I saw that ad, the thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. Why not find out for real? Why not take this small step and uncover the truth about my heritage once and for all? At first, I tried to talk myself out of it. It's just a gimmick, I thought. You'll probably just get some random, vague results. But as soon as I clicked on the link, I could feel that familiar sense of curiosity rising inside me. This could be the answer to questions that had been sitting unanswered for years. I spent a few minutes reading through the details on the website. The company seemed reputable enough, and their services were well-reviewed. But honestly, my decision wasn't based on all that. It was based on the simple, nagging thought that I had been carrying around for so long. What if there was more to my story than I realized? What if I wasn't just the sum of the stories my family had handed down to me? I clicked the Order Now button before I could second-guess myself, entering my details without much thought. It felt almost like an impulsive decision, a spur-of-the-moment thing. But there was something deep inside me that told me this wouldn't be just another harmless curiosity. This test, this little vial of saliva I'd soon send off, had the potential to change everything. And I was both excited and terrified at the idea of what I might uncover. The wait felt like the longest week of my life. I received an email confirmation when the kit shipped, and I eagerly checked the tracking number, willing the days to pass faster. Every time I passed the mailbox, I found myself looking for that small box that held the potential to unravel years of family secrets. When it finally arrived, I remember holding the box in my hands, feeling its weight. It wasn't just the physical weight of the package. It was as if the very idea of opening it carried a certain heaviness. Inside, I found a small vial, a set of instructions, and an envelope with the company's return address. It all felt so official, and yet there was something strangely intimate about the process. I wasn't just sending off a test. I was sending off a part of myself to uncover a history that I had no idea existed. I followed the instructions carefully. It all seemed simple enough. Collect the sample, seal it up, and send it back. But as I sealed the vial, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sealing away a piece of my future. What if my family history wasn't what I expected? What if there were surprises waiting for me? Hidden truths that could turn everything I knew upside down. In the quiet of the evening, I sent the package back. My heart pounded in my chest as I dropped it in the mailbox. I realized then that I wasn't just seeking answers to vague questions anymore. This wasn't just a curiosity. This was the beginning of something bigger. It wasn't just a DNA test. It was a key, one that could unlock the door to a history I didn't fully understand. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. The wait for the results began. I had no idea then just how much my life was about to change. The anticipation was unbearable. It had been over 3 weeks since I sent the DNA test back, but the feeling of waiting for something life-changing to arrive had a grip on me that I couldn't shake. Every day felt like a countdown, each moment of waiting building the pressure inside me, like a balloon slowly inflating. I kept checking my inbox, refreshing the email, hoping to see the notification that the results were in. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the email finally arrived. I had just finished a meeting at work, my mind still buzzing with the details of the presentation. As I walked back to my desk, I saw the subject line, "Your DNA results are in." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't waste any time. My fingers were already trembling as I clicked the notification. The screen loaded slowly, teasing me with its delay, but the moment the page opened, I could hardly focus on the text. I didn't want to waste a second reading the explanations. I went straight to the results section. It was overwhelming. I had been expecting the usual breakdown, maybe some familiar percentages showing my European roots, with a little dash of surprise thrown in. But what I saw instead shook me to my core. The first part was expected, a strong connection to Italy, just like my father had always said. There was a noticeable percentage that matched the ancestry my father had passed down. But then I saw something else, something that I hadn't expected in the slightest. My DNA linked me to a region in Eastern Europe, much more than I had anticipated. But that wasn't all. I scrolled down, my stomach twisting as I saw a startling and specific match. A small percentage of Native American heritage. I froze. That didn't make sense. Native American? My family had always joked about our mixed background. An Italian grandfather here, a bit of Slavic blood there, but Native American? No one had ever mentioned anything about that. My mind raced, tried to process the information, the implications. How could I have had no idea? My parents had always been vague about their ancestry, but no one had ever mentioned any connection to indigenous roots. My dad's stories about our family were wrapped up in pride for our Italian heritage, while my mom's side had always been an enigma. Native American blood was the last thing I would have guessed. The shock hit me like a tidal wave, my pulse quickening as I scrolled further. It felt like the floor beneath me had dropped out, leaving me suspended in disbelief. What did this mean? Did this mean there was something hidden in my family's past? Something no one had bothered to mention? Or was this some kind of mistake? Could the DNA test have been wrong? I couldn't sit still. I stood up from my desk and paced the room. My mind spun in circles as I tried to reconcile the results with everything I had ever been told about my family. The more I thought about it, the more questions emerged. Who on my mother's side could have had Native American roots? Could it have been a long-lost ancestor from generations ago? Or was this something more recent? My heart raced as I realized that I couldn't just ignore this. I quickly checked the match section of the results, hoping for some clue as to who these newfound relatives might be. There I found a list of genetic cousins. One name stood out, a cousin in their 50s who shared a high percentage of DNA with me. Their name didn't ring a bell, but the results suggested they were connected to my mother's family. I immediately felt a strange mix of hope and dread. Could this person have answers? Before I could process everything, I picked up the phone and called my mom. The call rang a few times before she picked up. "Hey, sweetie, how's it going?" she answered, her voice as casual as ever. "Mom, I got my DNA results." I blurted out, unable to contain the excitement and confusion all at once. "And there's something I need to ask you." "What is it?" "You sound like you're about to explode," she said, laughing lightly. But I wasn't laughing. "Mom, there's Native American blood in our family, like a decent percentage. How could you not have mentioned that?" The line went silent for a moment. I could feel her hesitation through the phone, and then she sighed deeply. I was waiting for the right time to tell you, she finally admitted. But I guess now it's as good a time as any. I was stunned. What do you mean, waiting for the right time? Why didn't you tell me before? She took a deep breath before speaking again. It's not something we talk about much, honey. Your great-grandfather was part of Native American tribe, but it's not something anyone ever felt comfortable sharing. It wasn't a topic that was discussed openly in our family. I didn't want to bring it up because, well, it was complicated. There'd a lot of history there that we didn't want to relive. I was silent for a long moment, trying to process what she had just said. The words complicated and history hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This was a side of my family I never knew existed, a side they had hidden away, buried under years of silence and secrecy. Mom, I need to know more. What do you mean by complicated? I pressed, my voice shaking a little. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or confused, but I was definitely unsettled. There was another long pause. I'll tell you everything when I come visit next weekend. Just please understand, it's not a simple story. But I will explain everything to you then. I felt the weight of her words settle over me, heavier than I expected. My mind raced with questions I had never asked, things I had never thought to uncover. But as much as I wanted the answers now, I knew deep down that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The truth about my heritage was no longer a simple curiosity. It was a tangled web, and it was time to confront it. I spent the rest of the evening rereading the results. Each word, each number, each percentage, now laced with new meaning. The mystery was just beginning, and there was so much more to uncover. The days following my phone call with Mom were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything at work. Every spare moment was consumed by the swirling thoughts about what my mother had said. The knowledge that there were parts of my family's history hidden away, locked behind years of silence, gnawed at me. And with each passing minute, the curiosity intensified. What was this complicated story? Why they kept it from me? The weekend couldn't come soon enough. When Saturday finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I had already spoken to my mom a few times over the week, but our conversations were brief. She kept reiterating that she would explain everything when we met face to face, and each time I spoke to her, it felt like she was holding something back. She wasn't ready to dive into the full story yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what she had to say would change everything I thought I knew about my family. At noon, I drove to my parents' house. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my mom standing at the door, waiting for me. She looked both anxious and relieved, as though the weight of the conversation we were about to have had been pressing down on her for years. I parked the car and walked toward her. "Hey, sweetie," she greeted me with a warm hug, but I could feel the tension in her embrace. "Hi, Mom," I said, pulling away slightly to look at her. "Are you ready to tell me everything?" She nodded, but her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. She invited me inside, and we sat down at the kitchen table, just like we had done so many times before. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of birds outside the window. Mom took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've been putting this off for years because it's not easy to talk about. Your great-grandfather, the one I've told you about before, the one who was part of our family's legacy, had a secret, a big one." I leaned forward, the anticipation building inside me. "What kind of secret?" She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed a mug of tea toward me. "He was born into a Native American tribe. Your great-grandmother met him when she was young, and they fell in love. But their relationship wasn't accepted by the community at the time. Your great-grandfather was considered an outsider, and there were a lot of people who disapproved of their relationship." I was stunned. I had never heard this before, not even in passing. My mind raced as I tried to understand what this meant for me. "Wait, so my great-grandfather was Native American? But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't anyone talk about this?" Mom's eyes clouded over, and she looked away, clearly lost in the past. "Because it wasn't safe to talk about. Back then, the world wasn't as open-minded as it is today. People didn't want to know about interracial relationships, especially between a Native American man and a white woman. My grandparents didn't want me to face the prejudice they had encountered growing up, and they made the decision to hide it. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the gravity of what she had just told me. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about a distant ancestor I had never met. This was about my family, my own bloodline, and how generations of people had kept something hidden for fear of how it might be perceived. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before, Mom?" I asked quietly. She sighed deeply, her hands wringing the napkin on the table. "Because it wasn't just about me. It was about protecting the family, protecting you. I didn't want you to have to deal with the same rejection, the same judgment that I faced when I was younger. I thought it would be better if you never knew." I could feel my chest tighten with a mix of frustration and confusion. "So what? You just kept it all quiet? You erased this part of our history." Mom's gaze softened. "I didn't erase it, honey. I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept it quiet, you would never have to carry that burden. But now, seeing the results of a DNA test, I realize that you deserve to know. You deserve to understand who you really are." Her words were both comforting and overwhelming. I had always thought I knew who I was, who my family was. But now, the pieces of my identity were crumbling. The foundation of my heritage was built on silence and fear, and I was left to pick up the pieces. "I didn't know what to say," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I never told your father either. He wouldn't have understood, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront the truth myself." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could feel the weight of my mother's secrets pressing on me, and the pressure was suffocating. "So what now? What does this mean for us?" Mom's eyes glistened as she reached out to take my hand. "It means that the truth is out there now. It's in your blood. It's part of who you are, and you can choose what to do with it. I didn't want to burden you with this, but now it's your decision how you carry this forward." I sat in silence for a long time, processing everything she had told me. The silence in the room felt different now, heavier, more profound. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a legacy I never knew existed, and it was suddenly mine to carry. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for the weight of it. "I think I need some time," I said, my voice strained. "This is a lot to take in." "Of course," she replied softly. "Take all the time you need. But just know that you're not alone in this." I nodded, my thoughts swirling as I stood up to leave. I needed to process this information to understand what it meant for me. But for now, all I could do was walk away from that table, with the weight of my family's secret heavy in my heart, and try to make sense of the puzzle I had only just begun to uncover. The days that followed that conversation with my mom felt like a whirlwind. I was haunted by the knowledge of my great-grandfather's Native American heritage, the secret buried within my family for generations. It was as though a shadow had been cast over my entire life, and now the light was finally starting to break through, revealing a part of myself that I had never known existed. But I wasn't ready to embrace it. Not yet. The weeks after that pivotal conversation were filled with a mix of emotions. I tried to go about my daily routine, but everything felt different. I kept seeing flashes of my ancestors in the faces of my family members, imagining what their lives must have been like, how much they had to endure just to keep their love hidden, just to protect their future generations from the prejudice that had scarred them. But there was still so much I didn't know, and I couldn't help but feel like I was on the edge of something monumental. The curiosity gnawed at me. I had to learn more. I had to understand everything about this hidden part of me. So I made the decision to start digging. I reached out to distant relatives, people I had never really kept in touch with, and I asked them about my great-grandfather. It was awkward at first, trying to talk to family members I hadn't spoken to in years, but as I explained my DNA test results and my discovery, they began to open up. I learned that my great-grandfather's Native American roots had been passed down through his mother's side of the family, and that they had lived on a reservation for much of their lives. His mother, my great-great-grandmother, had been a fiercely independent woman who had fought against the systemic oppression that her people had faced for generations. She had instilled in her children a sense of pride in their heritage. But when my great-grandfather fell in love with my great-grandmother, they were both forced to leave the community. They couldn't be together publicly because of the racial tensions that ran deep in the town they lived in. I spoke to one of my great-grandfather's cousins, an elderly woman who had lived on the same reservation where my great-grandfather had been raised. She told me stories of their childhood, how they had to sneak around just to be together, how my great-grandfather had been ostracized for falling in love with a white woman. She even mentioned that, after they had married and left the reservation, they had settled in a small town where my great-grandfather had changed his name, hoping to leave his past behind and start anew. Your great-grandfather was a brave man, she told me, her voice raspy with age. But he was also afraid of losing everything. Her words struck me deeply. I had never thought of my great-grandfather as a man who had lived in fear, a man who had made decisions out of necessity rather than desire. The image of him I had built in my mind was that of a quiet, stoic figure who had simply lived a life full of duty and responsibility. But now I realized that there was more to him, more that I would never truly understand unless I dug deeper. I spent weeks researching, reading about the history of Native American communities, their struggles, their resistance, and their resilience. I wanted to understand what had shaped my great-grandfather's decisions, what had influenced the secrecy that had surrounded our family. But with every new piece of information I uncovered, the more complicated it became. I wasn't just learning about my ancestors, I was confronting my own identity. I began to question everything. Was this the missing piece I had been searching for my entire life? Did this newfound knowledge change who I was, fundamentally? And if so, how would it affect my relationships with my family, with my friends, and even with myself? At work, I found myself distracted. I couldn't focus on meetings or projects. My mind kept drifting back to the discovery. I would catch myself staring out the window, lost in thought, as if I could somehow piece together the narrative of my family's history by sheer willpower alone. My colleagues noticed my sudden detachment, but when they asked me about it, I found it difficult to explain. How do you tell someone that you've just discovered an entire part of your heritage, and that it has completely turned your world upside down? It seemed too complicated to articulate. Eventually, I reached out to a genealogist who specialized in Native American ancestry. I wanted to trace my great-grandfather's lineage further back, to uncover as much as I could about his past. The genealogist was a warm, knowledgeable woman named Elaine, who was passionate about her work. She had helped many people reconnect with their native roots, and she assured me that she would do everything she could to help me understand my family's history. The process of working with Elaine was slow but enlightening. Together, we pieced together records, photographs, and oral histories. She even helped me locate my great-grandfather's birth certificate, a piece of the puzzle I hadn't expected to find. As we sifted through old documents, Elaine shared with me the story of how my great-grandfather had been given the name he had carried his whole life, a name that wasn't his birth name. He had taken it when he left the reservation, a way to erase his past and fit into a world that didn't accept him. It was a name that had hidden his true identity, his true heritage. With each new discovery, I felt a growing sense of pride, but there was also a lingering sadness. I began to understand the sacrifices my great-grandfather had made, the pain he had endured in order to protect his family. And I couldn't help but wonder, had my family's silence been a form of protection, or was it simply a way of avoiding a painful truth? One night, after spending hours researching, I sat in front of my computer screen, my eyes tired but my mind racing. It was then that I realized something. This journey wasn't just about understanding my great-grandfather's past. It was about coming to terms with my own identity. The truth about my family's history was challenging everything I thought I knew about myself. But it was also giving me the freedom to embrace who I was meant to be, to accept a part of myself that had always been hidden in the shadows. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of both closure and uncertainty. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew this journey wasn't over. There were more truths to uncover, more discoveries to make. And with each step, I was closer to understanding who I truly was. It's strange how a single revelation can change everything. How it can force you to see the world in a completely different light. At first, I thought the DNA test would simply be a neat little hobby, a curiosity that I could satisfy and move on from. But as I dug deeper into my family's past, as I learned more about my great-grandfather's struggles, the more I realized that this was not just a story about a hidden part of my heritage. It was a story about my entire life, about the decisions I had made and the choices I had yet to face. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. I'd been living my life in one direction, unknowingly following a path that had been set for me long before I was born. But now, with this newfound knowledge about my ancestry, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, uncertain of which way to turn. My understanding of family, identity, and even my own purpose was suddenly in flux. For the first time, I began to question the way I had viewed my family. My mother had always been the center of my world. She was my rock, the person I trusted above all else. But now I was seeing her through a different lens. Had she kept this secret from me to protect me? Or was it a way of keeping me in the dark, sheltering me from a truth that could disrupt the comfortable life we had built? One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone buzzing on the table beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about all the people in my family who knew the truth. My great-grandfather had carried this secret to his grave, but others, my mother, my aunts and uncles, had all lived with it, passed it down to me through hushed conversations, and yet never once had they shared it with me. What did that say about the dynamics of our family? What was the unspoken rule that kept this knowledge buried so deep? I picked up my phone, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I wanted to reach out to my mom, to ask her why she had kept this from me. But I hesitated. How could I confront her about something like this? It wasn't just the DNA test that was on the table. It was everything. It was the history, the legacy, the lie that had shaped my life without me even knowing it. The silence between us had always been a comfort, but now it felt like a barrier I couldn't cross. My relationship with my mom was based on trust, but in the wake of this discovery, I was unsure how much of that trust had been built on a foundation of truth. Could I ever look at her the same way again? Or would this secret always stand between us? I wasn't sure how to approach her, so I spent my days reflecting, gathering my thoughts. I needed to find a way to process this new reality, but I didn't know where to start. The questions I had about my family's past felt like an endless labyrinth. With each answer, more questions emerged. It was as if I had unlocked a door to a room I never even knew existed, and now the room was full of mysteries I wasn't sure I was ready to solve. At work, I began to feel the weight of the situation creeping in. I found it harder to focus, my mind constantly drifting back to the DNA test results, to the conversations I had with my great-grandfather's cousin, to the stories that were unfolding before my eyes. The work I once found meaningful began to feel insignificant. Everything felt overshadowed by this deep need to understand where I truly came from. But even as the personal impact of this discovery weighed on me, something unexpected started to take root: pride. In those quiet moments, when I allowed myself to truly reflect on the journey I had taken, I began to feel a sense of connection to the people who came before me, to my great-grandfather, to his mother, to the people who fought to keep their identity alive despite everything that had been stacked against them. For so long, I had walked through life without knowing the full story of who I was. I had been living a life that felt detached from something deeper, something real. But now, as I learned more about my Native American heritage, I felt a sense of belonging I had never known. I began to see the world differently, through the eyes of my ancestors, through the lens of their struggles and triumphs. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and I could finally see myself as part of something much bigger. My perspective on life shifted in profound ways. The struggles I faced didn't seem as insurmountable anymore. The challenges of everyday life felt more manageable because I had a new strength inside me, a connection to a legacy that had endured hardships far greater than anything I could imagine. I realized that this discovery was not just about learning who I was. It was about embracing who I could become. I started to talk about my findings more openly, sharing the details of my great-grandfather's life with friends and colleagues. The more I spoke about it, the more I began to understand how deeply this revelation was affecting me. It wasn't just about pride, it was about identity. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been hidden away for too long. But with that pride came a new sense of responsibility. The more I learned, the more I felt an obligation to honor my great-grandfather's memory, to preserve the history he had tried so hard to protect. I felt the weight of that responsibility, but I also felt empowered by it. This discovery had given me something to fight for, a sense of purpose that I had never known before. As the weeks passed, I began to piece together the fragments of my family's story. I started to see patterns, connections that I had never noticed before. The way my mother had acted when I was younger, the stories my aunts and uncles had told me, all seemed to align with the history I was uncovering. I wasn't just discovering the past. I was understanding how it had shaped the person I had become. There were still so many unanswered questions, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right path. I wasn't just learning about my heritage. I was reconnecting with it, finding a way to integrate it into my present and future. As I stood in front of my mirror one evening, reflecting on everything I'd learned, I felt a deep sense of peace. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something more important: clarity. The impact of my discovery was still unfolding, but I was no longer afraid of it. I was ready to embrace it, and in doing so, I was ready to embrace myself. The days that followed were a blur of reflection and contemplation. Everything had shifted. It wasn't just about the DNA results anymore. It was about what I chose to do with them, how I would integrate this new understanding into my life, and what kind of person I would become as a result. At first, I had been overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. The emotional turmoil had taken its toll on me, pulling me in different directions. The uncertainty about how to handle my relationships, especially with my mother, was difficult. I had spent so many years trusting her, but now I was faced with the truth that she had kept this secret from me, for reasons that were still unclear. I didn't know how to bridge that gap, how to approach her without feeling like a part of me was missing. But as time went on, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always come in one grand, dramatic moment. Sometimes it comes quietly in the small decisions we make to confront our fears and uncertainties. I didn't have to solve everything at once. I didn't have to figure out how to process the entirety of this discovery all in one sitting. What mattered most was that I was allowing myself to feel, to acknowledge the pain and confusion, but also to recognize the potential for growth. One evening, I sat across from my mother at our kitchen table, our usual dinner table, where so many of our conversations had taken place over the years. I had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but I knew that I couldn't avoid it any longer. The truth had surfaced, and it wasn't going to go away. "Mom," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I took that DNA test, and I found something out." She looked at me, her face unreadable, and I could see the shift in her eyes, the subtle recognition that the truth was coming out. She didn't say anything for a long time, and the silence between us grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, she spoke. "I knew you'd find out eventually," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of hidden truths. "I didn't want you to know, not like this." For the first time in a long while, I saw my mother as vulnerable, human. She wasn't just the caretaker, the protector, the pillar of strength she had always been to me. She was a person who had made difficult choices, who had struggled with the weight of secrets she felt she needed to carry alone. And in that moment, I realized something. We were both human, imperfect, and flawed, but we were family. And that, in the end, was enough. We talked for hours that night, about my great-grandfather, about my mother's reasons for hiding the truth, about the pain and fear she had carried for so long. She told me stories I had never heard before, stories that painted a picture of resilience and sacrifice, of family loyalty and protection. Slowly, the anger I had felt began to dissipate, replaced by a deeper understanding of why things had unfolded the way they did. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, about choosing to move forward without letting it define me. I had spent so much time trying to figure out who I was, but now I understood that my identity wasn't something that could be reduced to a test result. It was a combination of my past, my present, and the choices I made for the future. It was about creating a legacy that reflected my own journey, not the weight of past secrets. The healing process wasn't immediate. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the discovery felt overwhelming again. But as time passed, I began to find peace. I understood that this wasn't just my story. It was part of a larger narrative, a tapestry of lives, choices, and histories that connected us all in ways we didn't always see. With that understanding, I began to share my story with others. At first, it was only close friends who knew the details, but as the weeks turned into months, I felt ready to speak more openly about my experience. I wanted to help others understand that it wasn't the secrets we uncover that define us. It's how we choose to live with them. And in sharing my truth, I hope to offer others the same opportunity to reclaim their stories. I also took steps to honor my great-grandfather's memory. I reached out to the Native American tribe that had been part of my heritage, and for the first time, I began to connect with that side of my family. It was a humbling experience, and one that filled me with pride. I wasn't just the person who had discovered a hidden past. I was now actively shaping my future, learning about a culture that had been woven into my family's story for generations. In the end, the revelation was a gift. It didn't erase the challenges or the emotional journey I had gone through, but it gave me a new perspective. It gave me the chance to embrace my roots, to understand my identity in a way I had never imagined possible. And most importantly, it gave me the opportunity to reconcile with the people I loved, to build stronger, more authentic relationships with them. As I look back on everything, I realized that the true value of this experience wasn't in the test results. It was in what I chose to do with the knowledge I gained. The power of self-discovery lies not in uncovering the past, but in the way we move forward from it. The past may shape us, but it is our future that defines us. And in that future, I found peace.